As many of you know, I was not expecting much from Dune 2. I didn't particularly care for the first trailer, and while the second trailer I thought was much better, they've been showing the first trailer all the time. That's the one that you see again and again and again. So even though I did enjoy the first Dune, I had a couple of qualms with it, which we discussed in my review back then. I'm happy to say that I think this film much more embraces the idea of the white savior trope. As many of you were like, hold on, Grace, it's gonna cook. Well, how was I supposed to know it was gonna cook with the sequel? And I do think that the first Dune did do a lot of damage with some people to the brand. If people aren't going to see Dune 2, it's largely because they did not care for Dune 1, which is a real shame because Dune 2 is so much better. I'll just say it now. It's like Batman Begins versus The Dark Knight. That's the kind of glow up you're looking at here. And you know, the Batman Begins was only okay, I'll say it. But I mean, wouldn't you feel stupid if you missed The Dark Knight because you didn't care for Batman Begins? So that's how I feel about Dune 2. And I'm going to try without spoilers to explain to you why the movie is so much better, because I feel that's really, as I said, the only hurdle that remains. So yeah, I thought it would just be kind of like more of the same as the first movie. So imagine my surprise when the movie just absolutely blew me away. Sort of like the Dune 2 red carpet. It's extra. Now when the movie started, it reminded me very much of going to the opera or a modern art museum, right? Like you're not quite sure what you're looking at or what it means, but it sure is bold and interesting. And they spent a lot of money on it. You're like, wow, look at that set. They even create a new type of firework here, which I found fascinating. So at first, I thought that's largely what the movie had going for it, right? With more action. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But let me just say that there are actually two elements that I think significantly help this sequel. The first is, as I just said, more action. Much more action. I would say there's more action every, it's really artistic for like 10 or 15 minutes and then artistic action. And you're like, oh, excellent. Like the pacing is just much better to keep even casual viewers engaged, which is crucial. And that action is incredibly inventive, sprinkled throughout, as I said, to keep people engaged. It's not like, hold on, don't fall asleep for 2 hours and then we're going to go all out. No, there's cool stuff right away. In fact, I almost feel like when they were editing it, they were like, I feel we might be starting to lose some people. Put in an action sequence. And you're like, oh, that was a good idea. And then, what I thought was also very interesting about the movie is a fascinating discussion, or I guess you could also say exploration, because it's also very visual, as to whether or not Paul Atreides is the Messiah, right? Of course, that's the title of the third book, Dune Messiah. And this is approached in this movie from two fronts. Paul and his mother looking to use that to their advantage, both to secure their safety and to get revenge, right? And then also Javier Bardem's Stilgar, who genuinely believes it. And as you watch the movie, or at least for me, I found myself the most aligned with Zendaya's Chani, as in, I wasn't quite sure what to believe. And I think that was fascinating, the ambiguity of it. You were like, he might be the Messiah, but he might not. But I'm having a good time trying to figure it out. And I'll also say, this is what surprised me the most. And this is, you know how everybody focused on the bagpipe player in the first Dune? Hilarious. We all noticed the guy. And I remember these funny memes about guys being worried if the bagpipe player made it through the war. Because of course he's just playing the bagpipes, man. And I gotta tell you, I was worried about him too. Hilarious. That's like a whole, if they were really a little bit more, I guess you can't really do that with Dune because it's supposed to be so serious. That would be hilarious, like little short series to kind of maybe promote the film. But anyway, when I was watching this movie, when we got to the third act, which goes full on Lord of the Rings and full on war movie, and I saw the House of Atreides banner flying once more, I was caught off guard with how emotionally moved I was by seeing it. I haven't cared about House Atreides that much. Certainly not after I felt bad about what happened to them. But by the end of this movie, I was just like, oh man, yeah. It's hard to describe how I felt. But I imagine it's the whole reason that they carry banners in war. And I always wondered why they did. I was like, why make that dude carry that banner? It's similar to the bagpipe guy. You're like, he's just a sitting duck. Is it really that important? And when I watched this movie, I was like, oh yeah. It's like when I finally understood how Captain America's shield works by seeing him in Winter Soldier. I was like, oh yeah, that is useful. I finally was like, oh, I can see why you have the banner. It does make a difference. It was incredible. I'll never forget how I felt seeing that banner. Especially, not only because I was so emotionally affected by it, but I did not expect to be. I was like, wow, flapping in the wind. I was like, wow. Also, as someone who enjoys the study of history and current events, I don't think I've ever seen such an organic and honest look at colonization before from the perspective of those being colonized. Usually, Hollywood is very placating and condescending, offering up a pipe dream fantasy alternative. They're like, but what if this happened? And this, though, I felt, even though, of course, it's the highest of sci-fi, I still felt that the struggle of the Fremen was incredibly well depicted, and I found it to have honor and integrity. Also, they've done a great job of casting this time around, all the way down to the extras. You know, they just are adding an Oscar for casting. And I was like, that's stupid. We don't need an Oscar for casting. But then when you see a movie like this, and you see some of the talent that, gets an opportunity that maybe otherwise wouldn't with the way Hollywood usually goes, and you see such strong charisma down to the extras, I'm like, oh, maybe there is room for a casting Oscar. I think I might see the vision. So that was interesting. And I feel that, and then also to have those characters having such a open discussion about the white savior trope, I thought, really worked and made the movie finally get fully on track. I mean, I just really thought it was great. And I think that it might help the film have even stronger global appeal. I also think that some groups, particularly young men, will be drawn to this film the way they were to Joker. But whereas Joker was very much about the individual, Dune 2 is about the group. Again, looking at honor, revenge, sacrifice, fighting for something bigger than the individual. And I also feel it reminded me a little bit of gangs and gang warfare, which I found fascinating. How about the ladies? Well, like House of the Dragon, there's a big focus on how women are most valuable in a world like this and how they can extend the bloodline. In other words, have children. Also, that religion and espionage are other areas where women can flourish and excel. And of course, Dune combines the two of them, religion and espionage, in a very fascinating, even more so way than they did in the first film. And sure enough, just like throughout history, the world of Dune is not kind to women. I felt, we'll talk about it in the spoiler review. But I was like, that hit me too. I was like, whew. Yes, Dune 2 is often archaic, but in some ways it feels like going back to basics. Star Wars, some people argue Star Wars take place in the past or the future, right? And you had to have that thought with Dune as well, right? Like when Florence Pugh is writing in her diary and she says the date, you're like, wait a minute, is this like supposed to be far in the future or something? And then you're just following the movie so much you don't continue to try and figure it out. But this to me feels even more like that. Star Wars, although Star Wars is maybe perhaps, more of a popcorn flick than Dune. So maybe that's why Star Wars is the big brand and Dune isn't. We'll see how this movie does. I hope it does well. I would like to think that it would do well. But I think when you think of all of our technology and advancements that are layered on top, there are still some fundamental truths at play. And I think that Dune very much explores those, the good and the bad, right? Whether you like it or not. To me, what I like best about Dune 2 is that it underscores how hard you have to fight in life, like just constantly. One character even screams, I have to do everything myself. And I felt that. I felt the tension and the pressure that everyone in the movie is under. It's incredible. But you just have to keep pushing yourself. You can't give up. And I mean, also that there's always a path through. There's a visual like that I also really made a big impression on me. You'll love it when you see it. And I love that that's the message, I think, with Dune 2, that you just can't give up. Also, Paul's leadership. I love when movies reflect like where you are in life, right? So Paul's leadership. I was just having a discussion the other day about whether or not it's bad to be apologetic when dealing with others. Women in particular have this struggle, right? Like, should women be apologetic? Is that the path forward for them? Etc. And so to see Paul not being apologetic, that was very inspiring to me to see it in action. I mean, I loved it. Timothee Chalamet has some incredible monologues in this movie. I just loved it. Visually, of course, the film is stunning. Oh, it's gorgeous. And after putting all the pieces in place and establishing this world with the first movie, now Denis Villeneuve and company can play, right? All the pieces are in place. Let's go crazy. Many times when I was watching the film, I was just in awe of what I was seeing. And I feel, honestly, that the visual elements alone make it worth seeing in theaters. And again, very inventive action sequences. I don't want to give away any of the surprises. Some of the stuff was really neat. I was like, I did not expect that to happen. That was awesome. But I will say that the film really reminds me of Ridley Scott's early work with Blade Runner and Alien, which is not a bad comparison, Denis. Now, of course, Denis Villeneuve directed the Blade Runner sequel, which tanked, despite some really inspired sequences, particularly the abandoned casino showroom. That was incredible. But it couldn't save the movie because it was just one sequence. And Blade Runner 2049 did not have, I think, enough action. It was too cerebral. And I think the first Dune was very cerebral, but thankfully Dune 2 does not make that same mistake. They have tons of that type of sequence, which is fantastic. Dune 2, again, has the most action of a Villeneuve movie to date. And something cool and actiony, as I said, happens about every 10 minutes or so. Like riding sandworms? Oh my God, I love riding sandworms. I didn't think it would be that cool. The way it's brought to life on screen just blew me away. I was like, where is the theme park experience? This is fantastic. I mean, I see a roller coaster here for sure. It's amazing. Or some kind of immersive experience. And then there's the explosive third act, which I said goes all out. Also, excellent fight choreography and weapons that often seem very unique to Dune. You're like, only on Arrakis would we see that. I mean, boy, are they good with, everyone's pretty nifty with a blade. I was really impressed. They like invent not only their own weapons and spacecraft and vehicles, etc., but also fighting style, which I really liked seeing. I was like, I could watch you fight all day, Paul Atreides. But make no mistake, in addition to all these visual and action elements, spending more time with the characters themselves in the sequel is also crucial to why I think the film is so much better. Everything was so formal in the first film, with the audience kept at a distance, which, from a creative perspective, I understand mimicked where the characters and the situation was at that point, but it still created a cold distance with the audience. Here, this sequel lets its guard down, and therefore we as the audience are let in, and it makes you feel much more connected to the story and the characters. When I first tweeted about the film, when the social media embargo lifted, I said maybe Villeneuve, could get himself a Christopher Nolan level following with this movie. I think he's certainly better with character development, and he's miles better with female characters. And we'll see how Dune 2 does. If it doesn't do as well as a Nolan film, then we can consider what the differences might still be. But honestly, as I said, I think if anything holds people back from seeing Dune 2, it might be the mixed reaction to the first film. Some of you adore it, but some of you fell asleep. That's why that Onion headline was so funny. But you don't need, as I said, to see the first Dune to enjoy Dune 2. And some of you might say that's sacrilegious, but don't you want Dune to finally do really, really well? I mean, Dune 2 doing well is crucial to getting Dune 3. From what I've been looking at, we definitely want Dune 3. So who cares if people saw the first Dune? It's over, it's done, it came out. Now we have a concerted effort to make sure Dune 2 does well. All right, now let's talk about the cast. With Timothee Chalamet, I was worried I was just going to see Wonka. That film, I loved that movie. Warner Brothers is on a roll right now. Barbie, Wonka, Dune 2. Wow. And of course, I just recently saw Wonka. I saw it twice. But you know what? I'm so happy to say that I only saw not just Paul Atreides, but I saw the evolution of the character. From a space prince to truly a space messiah. That, again, I don't want to have any spoilers. We'll talk about it more in the spoiler review. But it was an incredible thing to witness. I never thought that I would really see a messiah or feel that I was looking at a messiah. But I was like, I think that might be a messiah. A lot of fans were bummed, of course, when Zendaya was hardly in the first Dune. But rejoice, as she is the co-lead here. And as always, she does an incredible job. I feel she's really ready to graduate from being the girlfriend to heading up her own movies. Which, I mean, even in Challengers, though, she's kind of still the girlfriend. I mean, we haven't seen that movie yet, but I think Zendaya's ready to not just be the girlfriend. She's very good at it, but I think she's got more in her. Austin Butler. He looks super cool in this movie, and he reminds me so much of the artwork of this comic book artist, Nick Dragotta, East of West. It's this little comic that I think only a couple of us read, but it kept going, and it also sometimes never made sense. And he in particular in Dune, Austin Butler looks like he stepped right out of that comic, which I think is really interesting. But also, one of the things that makes him look like he comes out of that comic is that he has very small, delicate features, which is unusual for someone who's so physically big as he is in this film. But really, I was like, if he opens his mouth and still sounds like Elvis, it's going to really hurt this movie. But he didn't sound like Elvis. Hooray! He did it! And in fact, I think what might have helped is that he's doing a very different, but also very severe type of accent, a Harkonnen accent. How cool is it that this movie created a Harkonnen accent? I was like, ooh, this is what Harkonnens sound like. He did a great job. So good. So I also feel that this sequel does a fantastic job of depicting Harkonnen culture and society instead of just making them the kinky, weird villains. I mean, they're still the kinky, weird villains, but at least now we know where they're coming from. I thought it was great. And also, any fan of Blue Eye Samurai will get a kick out of this, but I thought it was great that they decided to have the Harkonnen, or at least some of the Harkonnen, the higher level Harkonnens, dye their teeth black, just like they did in some parts of ancient Japan and what's explored in the Blue Eye Samurai show. So that's fascinating to me. I love when fantasy melds with like history and reality because it makes it feel more grounded and more real, even though, of course, it is still fantasy. Javier Bardem's role is much bigger this time, and he does a lot of heavy lifting, bringing both heart and humor to the film. While everyone else is fulfilling their destiny, he's just a regular dude, which makes him very relatable and likable. Also, that he can have such strong religious faith and devotion while still holding his own, still remaining his own person, I think is really nice to see, because Hollywood usually depicts religious people of faith as sacrificing their own self. They lose their self and just become, this movie is very much about the bigger group and something bigger than yourself, but it doesn't ask you to sacrifice the individual. You can have both. And I think I really like that. That to me seems the most appealing of the many things I've seen put forth recently. Florence Pugh has a very small role, I'm sorry to say, but it's a testament to her acting and star power that she really still makes an incredibly strong impression. She's great. She's just really good. Her role is like almost stripped down, very natural, right? And so I think that makes it seem even more authentic. She's great. Really, really strong. She, of course, was in Little Women with Timothee Chalamet, and I never thought of that while I was watching the movie, which is fantastic. It's very much its own thing. Everyone does a great job. Great cast. Again, good job, casting director, from top to bottom. Even Rebecca Ferguson, who becomes Space Karen. That's totally how I would describe her. And she does it with flair. She talk about not being apologetic. She's like, yes, her character has totally become a Space Karen, but she owns it. Also, I want to give a shout out to Sohila Yaqub, who also I thought really stood out as Chani's friend. She was great. The only actors who don't quite fit in, if I had to give notes, it would be to Josh Brolin, Leah Seydoux, and Christopher Walken, who are fine. They're fine. They don't disrupt the film. But I would say that they seem more like themselves in the world of Dune, like they're in a Dune photo shoot, rather than in the story of Dune. They don't transform as the rest of the cast does. So no matter your reservations, and I know some of you have them, I really honestly highly recommend you see Dune 2 in theaters. I mean, come on, do you have like a theatrical subscription like AMC A-List? It probably won't even cost you any extra. Go see it, because it's a rare combination of truly high art that's still a blockbuster. So it's still a lot of fun. It's visually stunning, and even though it's a sci-fi film, it manages to be a great war film as well. Plus, it's much easier to understand and follow than the first film, and I believe you'll actually find yourself emotionally engaged instead of just intellectually. Not to mention, this is a cinematic work of art. If you're at all into film, you owe it to yourself to at least see what Villeneuve is doing here. He's doing some really fascinating and interesting stuff. And as I said, this time he finally realized he needed to have enough action to keep, people who, even for me, sometimes that's not enough. The action is really important, and the emotional connection, allowing us to connect with the characters. That stuff, huge difference from the first film. So that's my non-spoiler review of Dune Part 2, hitting theaters March 1st in North America, and a couple of you lucky bastards are getting it early. Don't spoil it for anyone. All right, share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.